Over the past 50 to 75 years, obesity numbers in the Western part of the world, specifically in the United States, have skyrocketed, some years doubling over the year before. So this begs the question, is obesity, is being fat a choice? Let's unpack it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel for another video today. If you are new here, my name is Brittany Rose and I have been on a Mounjaro journey for over a year now and I have lost over 65 pounds. And today we are going to be discussing a topic that I am very excited to really delve into. And I hope that you guys can join me in the comment section below and let's have a true, real, honest discussion about this. I do want to say that please be respectful and understanding of other people's opinions when you are commenting. Let's try to keep this a productive, easy conversation and not really attack each other because I know that this can be a very heated topic. However, we are going to be discussing this very heated topic today. I want to go ahead and start with what really sparked interest in this topic for me. I recently came across a video here on YouTube by the channel Jubilee, which I am sure you have heard of. They are famous for doing, difficult discussions. Their series on that is called Middle Ground, and they did one recently on is being fat a choice. This video went up about a month ago. I'm going to link it below because it was an amazing video. It had both overweight and average weight individuals, and they really came together and had a deep discussion about what goes into being fat. Is it a choice? And there was people that had opinions on both sides, some people with more stark, rude opinions, and then, they had decent conversation. It was really just a great video all around. So I would highly recommend watching that, but definitely check it out in the description box below. But we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. So like I mentioned, over the past 50 to 75 years, being obese in America has just sort of become the norm. And there are so many factors that you need to look into to really understand why the obesity epidemic or endemic has really occurred here in America. And it's not just in America, but it is overwhelmingly more present in America than most other countries. We just live a very different life here in America than they do even in like the UK, where they walk a lot, even though they eat a lot of like bread and stuff like that. They also walk miles and miles every single day. So in America, it is definitely more present than in other areas. So in order to really like get a grasp on obesity as it is now, I feel like we need to start 50, 60, 75 years ago and really talk about how life has changed in every aspect during that time to really get us to where we are now in not only our health ways, but our life as well. So if you take a look back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, there are so many very stark differences to how life was lived versus how it is lived now. One of the most obvious ones that I know is a very hot topic, but one of the most obvious is that the majority of women who had families were at home with their family, and how this affects our health in so many ways. But in terms of obesity, one of the main factors is that women were cooking homemade meals for their family from scratch. They were spending a lot of time in the kitchen, really making meals from scratch. They were controlling what ingredients went into their food, and therefore people just overall were more healthy. And it's not necessarily just the food that was being cooked, but just overall the lifestyle that was being lived. If you really think about it, back at that time, having a car specifically was a luxury. Like, not many families could afford a car, and if they did have a car, most often it was only one, and the husband would take that car to work. So you had a lot more physical activity going on in terms of just being built into everyday life. If you think about it, moms were leaving the house and taking their kids to school every day, most often walking them, allowing the kids to ride their bikes to school. And then same thing at the end of the day, the mom was leaving the house and going to get her kids, especially before the public transportation system really took over, like school buses and stuff like that. Parents were walking their kids to school. So not only was mom getting more exercise throughout the day, but so were the children who had to either walk or bike to school. In terms of physical activity, just that difference right there is drastic, because there are so many children nowadays that just ride the bus to school or their parents drive them to school, and they maybe have 30 minutes of recess, and then they come home and they don't do any type of physical activity if their parents don't really force them to. So just having more physical activity built into the everyday life was a drastic difference. So if you take into account the homemade meals that kids were getting and just the increase in natural physical activity, that could already tell you why we're fatter now than we were back then. But that is definitely not it. You also got to think that there was no technology back then. Really, we didn't have Netflix and Hulu and YouTube and all that could entertain us on the couch for hours and hours on end. Kids were getting up and they were going outside and they were playing with their friends. In terms of entertainment was a lot more physical and not so much sitting on the couch watching TV. Now, none of this is new information, right? If we all really sit back and think about this, we would understand this, but there's just so many people in the world, especially more so recently, things have changed and we're going to discuss that. But prior to maybe 10 years, there was this vast sort of understanding that if you're fat, you're fat, and it's your fault you're fat, and you should get up off the couch and go to do something. But if we really sit back and think of the natural change in society and how it's developed over time, you can see where that change really happens. So fast forward 10, 20 years, and we have women that we have like the early feminist movement starting, and we have women leaving the home and going to work, which I'm not going to touch on that. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. However, in terms of health, you suddenly had this demand from manufacturers of food to make meals that were going to take very little time. So you had the increase in boxed dinners like Hamburger Helper, and then also frozen meals that parents could make after being at work all day. So with that came significantly higher calorie and fat content. Salt content was through the roof, and preservatives that previously weren't being exposed now are, because how are you going to make a boxed dinner or a frozen meal last for a year on, having shelf stable things? You're going to add some preservatives to it. And previously women were, making all their own food, canning their own vegetables from their garden, growing gardens. So you obviously had this major decrease in just women that were tending to gardens because they were out working and earning money for their family, which again is not a bad thing. It's just this change that happened in America when women went back to work. So when you really take all of that into consideration, you end up getting fatter and fatter Americans. And those show in these statistical numbers. If you look back in the 70s versus in the 80s versus in the 90s, you can see this clear increase of overweight adults in America. And all of those changes sort of coincided with technological advances and advances in feminism and women's rights and all of that. So it's really, if you really look at all the data, it's really easy to see how it coincides with each other. Now, with the increase, when people started getting fatter, you started having diet culture. And I feel like diet culture really played a role into the belief that being fat was a choice. So you started having all of these advertisers coming out with like the Atkins diet and Weight Watchers and low fat foods, which by the way, low fat foods are just full of a bunch of crap, because if you're taking out something that's naturally in the food, you're going to have to replace it with something that makes it taste better, because nobody wants to eat. When you take out the fat or the sugar content or the salt content, it's not going to taste good. It's not going to taste like what we're used to eating. So you replace it with some crap, some chemically made crap, so that people can tolerate eating it. So then we started feeding ourselves low fat, low sugar, low sodium foods that were just highly processed again and not good for ourselves, in order to lose the weight that we gained from not making homemade foods any longer. So it just became this cycle that Americans very willingly fell into of go on this diet, lose this weight, but it was never anything that anybody could stick with because it wasn't a natural thing for our bodies, when in reality, we needed to regress in a sense, not necessarily on like the advances in technology or women's rights, but regress in the sense of how we were treating our bodies in our natural everyday life, instead of working harder to lose weight in a unnatural way, forcing ourselves into the gym for an hour every day when that's not necessarily conceivable for all people because people are busy, right? So if we just walked somewhere, you walk to the grocery store if you need to, but that just became less and less doable with the increase in like suburb neighborhoods where things were far away from things and you just couldn't walk. Schools are not as close. Like I said, parents used to just let their kids bike to school or they would walk them to school. That's not very feasible now when you have a school that's 10 miles down the road, right? So society as a whole just went towards ease and comfort and laziness overall instead of natural hardworking physical labor or physical activity that we did previously in earlier generations. And I not necessarily think that that was on purpose. It's just how society developed over time. So once diet culture started, I got on a little tangent there. Once diet culture started and you had all of these, specifically women, because it was obviously monitored towards women and women's bodies, because suddenly these women that were nice and fit and healthy because of what they were eating and what they were doing throughout the day were sitting at desks. And so they were getting more overweight and we were seeing a lot more celebrities on TV and people wanted to look like that. So then we have diet culture and people start dieting, and that has just really, diet culture, I feel like really influenced the media, scientists, healthcare professionals in how they thought about obesity. So over the past, again, like 10 years, this has really changed. But prior to that, most healthcare professionals had the thought process that people that were overweight, if you went into your doctor's office and, they told you were overweight or that you were fat, they would say, eat less and move more. And they would really blame it on you as a person and what your choices were in terms of what you ate and what activity you did. And, didn't really take into consideration that there are so many factors that go into why a person is overweight. For one specific example, I, before having children, was in the healthcare industry, and during one internship that I was doing, I was working with a doctor who actually ended up becoming my first two child's pediatrician for several years before he retired. But he was a very wonderful doctor. He's very personable. Again, I chose him to be my children's pediatrician. But in one specific instance, we were in a exam room with a patient. We were talking about being overweight. She was an overweight woman. And he made the comment, he said to her, hey, if you're going to go to McDonald's, at least park and walk into McDonald's instead of going through the drive-thru. And that is something that now would never be said because he would be canceled, right? But at that point, this was probably... this was early 2000s, but at that point, that was something that could be said and it would be brushed off as a joke from him. But how do you think she felt about that comment? So sort of coming full circle here, we're going to start talking about what my opinion is on whether or not obesity is a choice. And I really think that this is a very difficult question. It can really go either way. It's very hard to say a definitive answer on what you think, which is why I want you guys to give your opinions down in the comment section, because I am so interested in hearing what other people think and how other people think about this. Me personally, I do not think that you can fully say that obesity is a choice when you take into consideration all of the facts on how life has just really developed over the past 75 years. I think that a large part of it comes in terms of how we were raised. So if you think about it, this generation that I am in now, we had parents in the 80s. And so at that time, you had a lot of women in the workforce. You had a lot of hamburger helper type meals. You had a lot of easy things. And so because of that, that's how we were programmed, and that's how our mind was set to believe. We also had the diet culture coming at us as young girls, and so we were told that we weren't good enough, we're too fat, our boobs aren't big enough, our butt's not big enough, we need a slimmer waist, whatever. And so we were fed all this information mentally, but then also served hamburger helper and frozen dinners and whatever. And so I think you really need to look at the mental aspect. It's not really as easy as somebody saying, don't eat as much food or go out and exercise more if your entire childhood growing up, you were fed crap and you were not pushed in any way to exercise. I think that can really have an effect on how we feel as adults and how we approach food as adults. I think that a lot of us have this all or nothing mentality, so that you either have to be on a really good diet and really strict, or you're eating everything in the world. And there was never any middle ground, because we were always told that in order to be skinny, you have to eat a certain way and you have to do a certain amount of exercise, when in reality, that's not true. There can be a balance, and there must be a balance in order to really have a healthy, fulfilling life. And so with that being said, I personally do not think that obesity is a choice. And you can see that in society over the past, especially like 5 years, with this increase in the GLP-1 medications that I myself am on, and I am fully open about that. You can see that scientists and healthcare professionals are really starting to look into why people are obese and how to treat it, and treating it like it's actually a disease instead of a choice. You see all of these people that go on a GLP-1 and suddenly they say, is this how normal people feel? You know, one comment that I saw recently was, it was on a Reddit thread, and somebody said, I started a GLP-1 and I suddenly understood why my skinny friends all those years could turn their food down and stop when they were full. For me, that was never an option. That was never something that I was able to do. But now that my brain chemistry has been slightly altered by this medication, I can do that. I can say enough is enough. Whereas before, we weren't able to do that. Our brains would not allow us to do that. So there's a lot more that goes into it on a brain chemistry, hormone, mental health level than just simply saying you need to eat less food or you need to go work out more. There's so much that goes into how we were programmed as children, how we were fed information by the media, how we developed into adults through all of that information, and how we believed life and health looked. Because in our minds in the 80s and the 90s, healthy life looked like eating low-fat foods, low-calorie foods, eating 1,200 calories a day and starving ourselves. And that's never worked for any of us. And the reason why is because that's not what life is. Life should be healthy living like the 50s, where we made our food and we ate home-cooked food and we walked a lot and we did a lot of things that allowed us to burn the fuel in healthy, natural, not forcing ourselves in a closed gym like a rabbit on a treadmill ways. And that over time has just developed into not being a thing. Now, do I also think that people do make choices to eat unhealthy food and then wonder why they're fat? Yes, I do. I think that while the amount that we eat maybe is not doable with our brain chemistry, like I was saying, like our brains don't tell us to stop until we're, engorged. We are still choosing to some extent what we put in our mouth. So can we choose healthier things? Can we work harder towards making homemade meals? Could we naturally start to take walks outside? Of course we could. But that's why I said that the picture overall is not a black and white answer, in my opinion. I think that lots of factors need to be considered. And that's why I agree with GLP-1 medicines, because they allow people to turn off the noise in their mind and the mental aspect of it. And they allow people to say, I need to make a healthier choice, and work with each other to make a healthy individual. So that is my opinion on this topic, and I cannot wait to hear what yours is. Comment down below. Go watch that Jubilee video if you want a good sort of back and forth conversation with people of all different body types. I think it was really interesting to watch, and everybody was very respectful for the most part to each other. So definitely go and watch that video. Let me know your thoughts down below. I love delving into these deeper topics with you guys. We're going to be talking about some mental health issues. We're going to be talking about lots of stuff here on this channel that I really want to spread awareness and educate on. Being obese and being overweight and what that means for ourselves as an overall picture, and how the media and people with ignorant opinions can harm us all. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let's have a chat in the discussion, and I will see you very soon. Till my shadow turns to sun rays, and on and on.